2 minutes before your session begins. So
Okay.
it's good actually. It's
All
good.
right.
Nice if you sign in now. We'll see you soon.
So I have forwarded this to quite a few groups, and let's see if they decide to jump in. Quite of them, they're all my school buddies, and
so whether they jump in or not, these are all in.
So I've been thinking.
So they've just finished their final exams. Now is the time to exercise.
Yeah. No, I've been thinking that I should propose something similar, like how the NLS alumni batch did, to my own alumni batches in Baldwin's and St. Joseph's. So I plan to put that across tomorrow. Not exactly the same thing, but anything, like this group, you have already put out some information like this. So try and see how we can collectively do something for such a purpose. Yeah. That's it. All right. Okay, Badri. I think your picture is hanging, but I'll be around. You can call me out whenever you need. Yeah. Okay. Bye till we meet again, Aditi, Badri.
Yes. See you.
Hi. Okay. Sorry. Aditi, you're live.
Okay.
Good to have you here. I just internet for a few moments, so I hope that has not caused any problems. I will just do one more thing. Okay, so I've just started making a little playlist. Let me see how it works out. So I think we were just okay. So do you want to talk about why we're doing this? Why you found this interesting and important, so to say, while I just get ourselves organized.
Yeah, I mean, there is a lot of talent in India, people who are making completely original music, which sounds world-class, but people don't know about it. People in our own country don't know about it. And like maybe if you play some of this music for some people in our country, they'll just think it's some foreign artist. And like if you don't tell them. So, I mean, I think it's important to really follow and nurture the homegrown talent in India, because I think it's pretty awesome. Like I'm really proud of the fact that we are able to produce so much amazing music in our own country, that there's so much to explore here before even going to Western artists. But then, like you said, like most Indian indie artists, except for maybe one or two who have like made it, so to speak, they don't have plays, they don't have views, they don't have enough followers. It's really sad. And I mean, I'm one of those artists too. So I know that we have a lot of investment and costs involved to even produce even one song. But the returns are just not enough. And for some artists, it's like really, really like even more not enough, So in a small way, and I've seen with, I mean, my own music, that organic spread is the best way to really get people who are really in it for the music. So if we do a listening session like this, and even 10 people hear it, but they really like it, and then they tell their friends, that's a really nice way to actually spread without being, listen to my stuff, follow my stuff, sponsored posts, like all of that gets, a little.
Yeah, ask you something. It feels so crappy to like tell people to follow, like, share, subscribe. And it's so weird because you reach out to like thousands of people, barely anyone responds. And we live in a kind of society which doesn't really like acknowledge art, Like we just assume it's there and it gets made, and like the songs that we're about to play today, I've deliberately picked songs which are at least a few years old to just indicate that the scene has been amazing for a while now,
Yeah.
And so actually the way you're describing is exactly what I have done myself, which is play this at parties, take it, play it.
Exactly, yeah. And people like, wow, that song is cool. Literally, I think people just need to be made aware, like just make them hear it. Then the music does the job itself. You don't have to be like, hey guys, follow this artist, I like them. You don't have to do that. They just need to hear it once. They'll naturally be curious, because some of this stuff is really fresh. It's really stuff that you might not have heard before.
And I really appreciate it, and it's been fresh for a long time, which is what is quite cool about this entire situation. Yes. Anyway, so I have opened my screen, unfortunately revealed my first pick. Is it visible?
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay, so shall we
perfect.
dive right in
Yes.
and see how it goes from there? So the first song I picked is Nanox Fever because it's a blurry, hilarious video. And this song, have you seen this? I think.
I haven't seen this actually.
Oh man, it's so funny, and it's set in Bombay. And I'm talking to you here, and you're sitting in Bombay. No, you're sitting in
Yeah.
Delhi, right?
I'm in Bombay. Yeah.
Okay, okay, wait.
Yeah.
I'm never entirely sure where we are. And does it even matter? Like, I should
Yeah.
be on Mars right now. So long as light speed travel. I mean, light speed is not far enough. I guess it's okay. Wait, hold up. Let me just try to rearrange this. Okay, so my first pick is Nanox Fever. I love this song. It's a beautiful video. It's so funny. But yeah, you're gonna see it. So I'll play this first.
You ready? Turn it up!
Ready and action.
Oh my god, isn't that hilarious? And
Yeah, that was awesome. I can't believe I haven't seen that before.
I can't believe it, Aditi. That was so funny. And the reason I
Yeah.
like this one is because, I mean, it's called Fever, which is ironic in our time. You know,
Yeah.
we're trying to heal the others. Because you know what I love about this? It's so easy for joy to spread, you know. And
Yeah.
it takes nothing. And how beautiful it is that you can just
Yeah,
like,
it's very simple, but it's like, but the cuts and the shots to the music have been done really well also.
oh, it really has no like because
Yeah.
I don't know. We should ask him because I'm not sure which one came first. I don't know if he figured out the move, or it's possible that he kept a consistent pace and then they just.
I feel like generally the music would have been made first because that's how it's timed so perfectly to that.
Yeah, but that means they've had to plan every shot in context without knowing
Yeah.
who they're going to be hanging out with, right?
Yeah.
That's really insane. But that was my first pick. Should we go to the second pick? Your pick,
Yeah.
I haven't yet.
My pick. Which one? Which order are you doing? Mine.
I'm doing Ape Echoes next.
Ape Echoes, yeah. So Ape Echoes are a band that kind of started out a little bit before I did, but we kind of found our feet at the same time, and we were also both managed by the same people. So I've got to kind of play gigs when we have been on the same lineup a bunch of times, and their sound is really cool because it's really like you might not understand that this is an Indian band that is making these sounds. They have a lot of influences of Anomaly. Have you heard Anomaly, the keyboard player?
No, I have not.
He's amazing. So they have a lot of that kind of neo soul, funky, but then they also have a lot of electronica, filters, pedals, gear. They're like total gear nerds. Yeah, this is a really cool song that they made this video to. I think this video is really relatable right now in lockdown. So like you can watch it and I'm sure you'll really like it.
This, Ape Echoes, I've been following their SoundCloud page because they came on the. I discovered that Nitya was putting out your music many years ago, right?
Yeah.
And around the same time, like I became a SoundCloud nerd and I found Ape Echoes there. I couldn't believe that these guys were from India, like
they're
such sophisticated sound.
And both of these guys are like, they are now some of the most sought out producers in the scene, like Nirmit and Sid. They do production for a lot of other artists as well because they're really slick with it. They really, really are.
It shows, and the way they can bring like regular instruments and the electronic sound together, I think it's unmatched. And like India, like Nuclear sort of became the mainstream version of integrating.
True.
But there's so many others who I think do, in my opinion, maybe a more sophisticated job, sonically speaking. It's not as straightforward. I mean, I don't want to like pull anyone down. It's just that I'm just saying there's a lot more variety than you would imagine, And
because these guys are all like, these guys have all studied music and they all play instruments. So it's live electronica. So they're using electronic elements, but they are all shredding. Like their live shows are crazy. Like crazy band,
that's nice because the next track is also in the similar department. We'll just talk about that. But here goes Ape Echoes holding tight.
Hold tight, it's gonna be a long and cold night. Sleep and you let all the bugs bite. Keep a lookout, it's all that you can do to stay alive and reach for something they didn't teach you with the folklore. Something unfindable on shore, deep underneath the ocean. There, old sight doesn't chase the back that feels right. Feels like we're making it to twilight, thinking of the bones until the end. All space and time, it makes your life just a little more painful, but then it gets back tenfold, all just to make you wish it away.
going to pause right here. I'm going to pause it because this is so typical. And dude, it was so nice of this Jim Sharp to like participate in this because he was a theater actor before all of this, right?
Yeah.
His versatility is amazing.
It's amazing. Yeah.
Like so nice of him to do this video. And I say so nice not because like, oh, it's so cool that he condescended to this. Of course the music deserved this. There's no question about it. It just so happens that
but it added a lot of character to the video.
Yeah.
So they did this as part of this I think NH7 had done a Bacardi house sessions where they picked like a few artists, and I think they did fund it, which was great. I think artists really need look at the kind of like amazing art that comes out of it if these artists just get a little bit of funding, which they don't have normally. So it helps them to make like a proper like world-class video, I would say. But this is so tripped out, and the beginning of it is very relatable because I think we've all had those kind of thoughts all the time. So yeah.
This so next song we'll jump in that direction, I think, because I think all those points we made earlier of live electronica and all completely true. You can see how much space there is in this song for them to move around and play around, right? Even if with his live, is it like each one of those is just infinitely extensible. And I think the next band that I'm going to play, I've picked Arid Sound Mages. Have you seen this video?
Awesome, yeah.
Oh man, what an amazing video! This the video was made by Arid Sound is Nakwash and brother Joe. Is part of a brother and sister, both of them called Joe. There's Jolsna and Jyotish, but I just know him as Joe Panikar. And Nakwash is this crazy visual artist. He doesn't make music, right? But he makes the videos to their live performances. So it's like one visual artist and one musician. They're wonderful human beings. He used to be a teacher in Baroda, and now Nakwash makes pens. It's called Chingu Pens on Instagram. He's selling calligraphy pens for like 50 or 80 bucks. Something is like really wrong with him. I bought like 50 of them to give it to other people, but please go check it out. They're just
what's it called? Pingu pens.
Chingu
like, pens.
CHINGU. And please, you should tell all our friends. And this video was made by another genius, and we'll talk a little more about him. He also has a band with Sister Joe. He's married to Sister Joe as well. Mages is just like it could be on Mars is all I have to say about it. who, along with Brother Joe, Sister Joe, Smokey the Ghost, several others, made this film called Rani 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 last year, which was a sci-fi film set in rural India somewhere, time travel, time warp session. That was, I mean, like the first, I've scoured that video many times trying to find signs that it was staged and there are identifying places. I'm clueless. All I know there is that it happened in Deccan Plateau, and apparently there is this coda, maybe. But Rajaram is this polymathic genius who does, I mean, he plays the hangpan and 10 other instruments like the kazoo, whatever. He just fools around a lot. Sister Joe is a genius as well. And he has a shop called Gear Motorcycles where he modifies bikes, and he also records and shoots movies for a living. So he just does what he wants. How insane is that?
Crazy. Trippy. Really trippy.
So trippy. So next is your trip, Aditi. We have me and Meba Philia.
So these are two artists from Shillong. Meba is insane. I think she's one of the best voices I've heard in India today. Like I couldn't even believe it when I heard this girl, because she raps and she sings both with her own really distinct style. And like in India, you have singers who try to rap, rappers who try to sing. They're better at one than the other, but she is literally up there with both of them. So not enough people know about her again, but she's like a big superstar back in Shillong. And Bigri is part of the Khasi Bloods, an amazing hip hop collective. And oh my God, I think part of my heart is in Shillong. I go there more than my Khasi friends. I go there three to four times a year, and I'm really missing being there, because last time I was there was last June, so it's been a year. But apart from these guys, there are so many great acts from Shillong, like Dewdrops, Blue Temptation, so many, Andrea Taryang, Soulmate, of course, which has kind of moved past, it has reached people more because they've been around for so long. But this song is a pretty cool song, hip hop song. Check it out.
Eva reminded me of Beyonce, because it's like, wow, how cool is this lady who can do everything?
Yeah, she's amazing. Yeah. She's amazing.
Decade old, no? I feel like I've seen them in their chubbies making YouTube videos on an iPad.
I think she's quite young. Yeah.
No, Khasi Bloods, of course, have been around much more.
Of course.
They've been. But let's hear this and then enjoy it.
Awesome.
it. I'm obstinate, yet only when I'm confident that it's a better solution than the one I'm proposing. Like I said, if I need you, I'll go give you a call. Until then, you don't have to check up on me at all. I mean it. Yet if you need me for real, then I'm down. I mean it. Cause this is more than just a feeling. So much more than simple sentiments. It runs deep in my veins. Yes, it keeps these demons chained. It keeps me sane. I can finally hear myself thinking.
Take a load off. Stress helps nobody take your clothes off. Warm water's good and all agony. Hours on end, that raggedy moment, that calamity. Running your mentality, shunning positivity. Lacking alacrity towards that evening meeting. Cold and unappealing. Knowing my ego's about to receive the worst beating. Knowing this could be over before we reach that opening. Centuries blaring past their vision. Should I together? Threw it under the bus, played with it till it pops, then wipe it away like pus, not us, because it's always ashes to ashes and stardust to stardust. Cold is the confession leading to this fall upon us. Erroneous, what I've done, you're disgusted. It's so fun seeing you act like it ain't obvious. Fabulous, how you looking day and night. I'm tired of this sitting, waiting for that big fight.
Cause this is more than just a feeling. So much more than simple sentiments. It runs deep in my veins. Yes, it keeps these demons chained. It keeps me sane. I can finally hear myself singing. Now you can go ahead and start to count all day.
Unless you're better than you're always, in which case you raise yourself.
You could be on the road that pays.
Then no, I'm so proud of you living and doing your own thing.
I don't mess with all the hate.
Me, I got the herbs, my nerves, they serenade all day, every day. There's no gimmick, in fact it runs deeper than the Pacific. Prolific, saying nothing is ever the end of it. Life is greater than life in the flesh, death, decay. What could have, what may, who made what mistake? Love is for love's sake, music's for love's sake, art is for love's sake. If anything is at stake, then life is for love's sake. Sacrifice is for love's sake. In those eyes I can see the love fade. That's okay, cause I can't begin to fathom the true depth of your pain. I'm throwing my deuces up, saying this love remains.
Like he has so many voices, right?
Yeah,
like, listening
right?
to him is like listening to a country of rappers. This one was like a cross between like the southern style and mumble rappers, like in between, you know, with like smooth flow, not going
Yeah,
hard.
it's very easy kind of, but like very cool, like effortless.
Correct, exactly. So you'd associate with the southern rap, like remember, not entirely the West Coast California vibe, because that's a little more hard hitting than this. But but it's just, you can't really put it into a box. And
it's very unique. The sound is very unique. Yeah.
The gentleman has so many voices, and Niba, what a voice, and how he shifts. I mean, like Donald Glover is the other human being who shifts so easily between like talking and rapping and music. You know, it just flows out of them. The same kind of. I think you also do, but
you might see a Aditi Meba collab sometime in the future.
Wow, that's so cool.
We've been talking about it.
So
I mean, not anytime soon. I'm just like giving you a tease. Like at some point, we are planning to.
You must. You'd be so great together. Because I also think the tonality of your music, because you have a much heavier voice than she does, right? But she has a voice which retains its form at a much higher pitch. And I think together it would be really nice contrast. Both of you have a voice which would complement each other, make space for each other's voice, I think, in your... I'm excited for whatever comes out. Okay, let's see, what have we got next? Oh, this is an old favorite. It's called Where the Money Flows by Peter Cat Recording Company.
Oh, yes.
Album.
Amazing.
We have to listen to this many times.
I love it. I love this album.
PCRC 2012 came down to Strawberry Fields where we were organizing. We're in the finals. They did a sound check of a song which I can't even mention here.
Yeah.
They used to have it on their Bandcamp many years ago, but they've since taken it down.
Oh.
I remember this guy. What's his name? Suryakant Sani. He says we make happy music that nobody will take offense to, And he has they have the Bollywood jingling going on the side. I remember seeing an interview where he says Lifafa is my Hindi soul and Peter Cat is my soul spoken in English. And it's so many musical forms, but for Indians, it's very sonically familiar. So it's very difficult to hate on them, even if you want to. And it's like how do you dislike the Peter Cat song? Except if you're not a fan of Chaos. I remember going to Zero Music Festival 2014 long ago, and they went mad, on stage. This guy was hardly on stage, and it was extremely ethereal because Bicycle Days had performed before them. And Bicycle Days is now retired and became Blushing Satellite and many other things. Like Zero is beautiful because you're on these paddy fields, golden paddy fields, and like the clouds ascend, onto the little hillock that you're on. And with the lights, the stage is not your only stage. The entire valley is your stage, With Suryakant there, I like it. The entire thing feels like a dream, where he did a Lifafa set and he did the PCRC show.
Nice.
It's insane. But that's before Bismillah. There is an after Bismillah as well. But let's start with this. How are we doing on time? 7:40. Okay.
I feel like we have a lot of songs left.
No, we can keep going. I think like this is really like part 0. I think maybe point 0.
We can even cut off a few of them and do it another session where we, in case.
For sure. I mean, this is part 1. Let's do 50 of these. We can do thousands of these. Really, the amount of music there is. I think, but the joke here is that we're ultimately creating reaction videos. Like I can't control my head bobbing, and clearly you can't control. Maybe we should make our screens a little bigger and get some views for ourselves. No, you're not the one who needs views, but of course, more views never hurt anyone. So anyway, let's start with where the money flows. Which is. I mean, they make and break their own metaphors for all of us. Let's just play it.
I could stick around. The more I would stay, the more I'd be found. Oh, where the money goes, oh, where the money flows. And though I need your love, I would wiggle out. And though I feed your love, I would smuggle out. And if I make it so, and if I make it so, maybe I would burn this town. And if I fall close to the edge now, I would make it a burn. I would make it about. And when I see the sun, I just tell a lie. So you pick me up and help me stay alive, or let the money flow. the money goes. And I see it spinning, and I see them spinning, oh, and I see the world around, oh, I see them spinning about, and I see it spinning about. Oh, I see them spinning about.
मेरे प्यारे देशवासियों, I'll be speaking to you about some critical issues and important decisions. Today, I want to make a special request to all of you. Brothers and sisters, to break the grip of corruption and black money, we have decided that the 500 rupee and 1000 rupee currency notes presently in use, hoarded by anti-national and anti-social elements, will become just worthless piece of paper. The rights and the interests of honest, hard-working people will be fully protected. I have confidence in 125 crore people of India, and I'm sure country will get success. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot. Namaskar. Bharat Mata ki Jai.
Oh, baby, I would burn this town if I fall close to the edge and out. I would make it a boat. I would make it about. Baby, I would stick around. Oh, the more I would stay, the more I'd be found. Oh, where the money flows, or let the money go.
Classic.
Howard is so clever on so many levels. And this is what I really love about this is that they could be speaking about a love story or demonetization. Both of them, like if you listen to the lyrics, you really can't tell which one it is. And the funny thing is, Suryakant Sani moves exactly like this on stage and around stage, right?
Yeah.
This is so trippy to see him as a little monkey going. This is perfect.
Yeah. Damn good.
Just move on. I think we might have time for 2 more songs.
Yeah, we can drop off. I mean, I had picked one song which didn't have a video, so we can skip
Hey,
that.
I found a live version of Samantha.
Sorry?
I found a live version of this.
Oh, you did? Oh,
I did.
these guys
I
are
did.
amazing.
And I only want to play Sand Dunes after that, and we can end with that. Because
Sure.
did you see this video? This last one with Siddharth Basrur. It's epic. It's
Which
called
one?
Two. Okay, oh man, I'm so happy to introduce you to that. Okay, here.
Awesome.
We'll start with Samandar first. It's nice to like, we are multi.
Yes. Have you heard Shadow and Light before?
I've heard Shadow and Light, but I haven't. I've never heard them live.
Oh my god, live is, I loved it actually more than even their recorded versions, because they play with the drummer and the bassist, and I mean, for me that sound is, you know, the live sound is something else. And I discovered them because I just went for their EP launch gig and I hadn't heard of them before at all. But fusion done in a very different way. It's really cool to see how different people can do fusion in their very own way, and it doesn't have to all sound the same at all. So their approach is really their own, very original.
Oh, absolutely. You know, other artists who I think do fusion really well. You know, Karthik Iyer used to get a lot of flack from my Karnataka community sometime back, but I think he does it really good.
I like it. I like the Karthik Iyer live. Yeah, Indo soul.
Piano. I also like Urali. Have you heard Urali when they do reggae in Malayalam?
Oh, no, I haven't heard that.
They're insanely good. Okay, they're one of my favorite bands, I think, of all time, and they go around distributing paper cranes, wear masks during shows, right? Like it's
Nice.
a party, and you're all like, it's incredible. But I mean, I don't think we have time for them. But
yeah,
anyway,
but
let's start with some. This is from a UNESCO gig in Varanasi, apparently.
wow.
So, how
Nice.
crazy is it? It's been put up by a platform and stage where the budding talents of lean for no good reason, man. That's me, not you. Budding talents and the legends perform together in an amalgamation of Indian classical and light music on one stage. Light music. Do you remember?
Light music. Yeah.
I love the phrase. What do you have otherwise? Heavy music or what? Like classical music is
Heavy music, not light music.
not light at all. I have
दूर दूर तक दूर दूर ढूंढ रही आँखें दूर दूर तक दूर दूर लेके मन सपने दूर दूर तक दूर दूर सुनकर ये बातें दूर दूर तक दूर दूर बीती सारी रातें ये समंदर बहुत गहरा है कहानी पर अधूरी है मौसम बदलते रहते हैं कि कैसा इम्तिहान है yeah.
Sorry?
That was heartbreaking. And it was heartbreaking because it was clearly like light music up for this event. A bunch of people who was like sitting there. I don't know how they were feeling inside. But,
Yeah.
Man, that was not fair to the band at all. And like,
And I also feel like that might be one of the older videos because they are not better than even that now.
For sure.
Especially Pavitra, she has a lot more confidence. I can see it's very nice to even watch that. You can see the innocence that she's a little younger there. She's Shubha Mudgal's student. She's amazing vocalist, and they didn't show Anindu, but he is an amazing composer and arranger. He arranges all their music, and he's from Advaita, like old school, so great band to check out for sure.
We will there are better representations of shadow and light because it's not a fair one. How easily she could have shifted into scatting if she wanted to. It was right there. It was so on point.
Yeah, I don't even think that's her vibe. But I think that her vocals are much stronger than they were in that video. If you hear even the recorded songs, you will be able to
I don't think they might. I don't think it makes the audio circuitry. It seems like they just recorded
some random video. Yeah.
Saying all these mean things in public. Anyway, okay. So
the last song. Yeah.
Maybe second last, okay? Let's just see because this is 3 minutes and I have one surprise for you. If you haven't heard, this is another, after this is another artist. We'll see how it goes. We'll see.
Okay, cool.
Skip it. But I'm so happy you haven't seen this. Siddharth Basrur was with this prog rock band, which once probably feels, I forgot what it was called. It had another guy. He now has a solo project starting with Z. Oh man, it's not coming to me.
Runt. He has a band called Runt, which plays now.
There's also this guy who has dreadlocks who used to play the guitar. Names it's just not coming to me right now. But that Basrur was one of those people whose voices have gotten much better over the years. But here's Good to You with Sand Dunes. Sand Dunes, man, she's so beautiful at what she does. What a genius. Another classically trained musician, no? Studied in London, back here. This is about 3-4 years old, if not longer than that. And again, Bombay vibes. We had Jim Sir, we have more Parsi vibes coming up. Really.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah. you know what?
So good. I feel like we should end with that one because it's
No,
also.
I was just about to say that. I was just about to say that. One second, something is playing somewhere. Okay, that we'll start with the next
was
one.
Awesome. Yeah, I loved it.
Wasn't that beautiful?
So good and so simple again to execute. I think you just need a good storyline. You don't need effects. You don't need, yeah.
And you know what I like the most, I think, in that, Indian musicians have had skill. There's no question about it. And, it's not like there are abundant resources to be making the kind of videos that we have here, right?
Yeah,
so It was really wonderful to see this in such a simple way. So
Yeah.
we also have our other participants here. I think we'll just say bye to you, but I want to say one thing before you go, because the point of this exercise is twofold. So one, of course, is that we wanted to have broadcast media which is inspired by love for beauty and love for wisdom, because we don't have enough of that in the media that we consume. Most of the news we consume is shit, and that's really not the way to be. And we are interested in conversations which could have happened 100 years ago or 100 years ago. And what's also happening is that, the first session really was to say that capitalism is dead, long live capitalism, and consumerism is dead, long live consumerism. Because we want to inspire one which is cognizant of where the art and the work that we see in the world comes out. So the conversation in today's panel is on the publicness of private enterprises, but the first session was really about consuming the Indian music scene, the Indian independent music scene. Wouldn't it be nice to support small businesses? This is what it means. And when you think about capitalism and the cultivation of equity, that's what creates wealth, not the large company accumulating more wealth and coming in the way of more people participating in generating equity for themselves. But this, and that's what we thought, that's why we thought it went very well with this conversation. So Aditi, you can leave right now, or you can answer one question and leave. Or we'll say right now if you want.
Okay, I'll answer a question.
You can answer one question. I'll do a quick round of introduction. So this is the 10th, but actually 11th, because we had an episode 0 of lawyers, artists, and others taught law, love, and equity. So this is public media. This is not a government channel, so it's public media. We don't have public media in India. The cost of producing this is tiny, right? We just needed a Zoom Pro account. Literally everything else is DIY, which is the power of the internet. And so here, the small transaction that we're inspiring is not large advertising, but your kindness towards 3 significant causes. The first one is social security for migrant workers, because labor is what has made our country, and we need to create more dignity around those who work in labor. Food security for the urban poor, and the third is protective gear for essential caregivers, and that includes barbershops, your kirana shop owners, so on and so forth, because this is what we need. We'll do a quick round of introductions after this, but the first question I want to ask all of you, I think you can answer this and then feel free to leave, please. Is you've already heard this, so it's okay. I'm sure you have practice. So the question I want to ask all of you, we'll start with Aditi, so you have an extra minute or so to mull over this, is how would you talk about yourself without talking about what you do or where you're from? We all know your roles and titles and what you stand for and things like that. We'd like to hear about your dreams, aspirations, beliefs, how your day was, what you like to eat, whatever you want, but anything that allows us to appreciate you for more than your role or function that you perform in society or to someone else. Yeah, Aditi, your turn. Don't say musician.
I will now say that because of lockdown and because I don't have my usual avenues for revenue in terms of corporate shows and live shows, I am now a humble music teacher, earning small amounts of money and putting lots of work into that. But it's really been a great experience. I just started, so like a party ma'am, as you would say.
Party ma'am in Karnataka, no. It's awesome, but there are a bunch of people here who can help you, Aditi. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for doing this, and I'll tune into the session on YouTube. Watch you guys.
See you soon. Yes. Bye.
See you guys.
Bye. Okay, so coming to the more serious faces in this conversation, I feel like I shouldn't smile so much anymore. But anyway, so Professor Somashekar, shall we start with you? So how would you talk about yourself without talking about what you do and where you're from?
Sure. Thanks, Badri. Thanks for inviting me over here. It's very difficult, we are so used to describing ourselves with respect to our profession. Suddenly you tell, what are you otherwise? It's a bit of a puzzle, but I must say I thoroughly embarrassed myself by jutting into your live session online, and I had no clue what was happening. But anyhow, so what am I doing
Have a
right?
good time.
Yeah,
Because that's the question that matters here, actually.
yeah. Anyhow,
No,
how do I describe myself apart from what I do professionally? Well, I would say right now I'm in pursuit of, pulling this off a movie, in pursuit of true and sustainable happiness, which doesn't involve thinking of myself.
wow. So that went too deep, too soon.
No. I just pulled it off. I wasn't thinking of this. I just pulled it off as I went along. That sort of sums up basically what I would really like to do and what I'm trying to do, but I'm being very unsuccessful at.
I don't think so, sir. I don't think that's a fair response at all, because
well, yeah, maybe. Thanks, but you're being nice. But anyhow,
I'm not being nice. Ask anyone here. I mean, Yaman has been your student as well. We know that first trimester was made miserable and joyous both because of you. So, that is, so you taught us economics, and both in the first and second trimester in law school, when we were still wondering why we were studying economics in law school, right? And from you, I remember what you've learned is to understand that economics is really the study of people, the relationship that they share between each other and resources, and how you estimate them. So it really gave a lot of context to our study of the law. And I think I learned it much later in life than when I learned it from you. I was anyway happy because we got to do some math in law school, but it was nice. Yaman is smiling, so we're going to ask him this question next. Yaman, you are a partner of competition law. You're my debate guru, and like several generations of people who've learned how to dialogue from you and with you. So please don't talk about these things. Please don't talk about the fact that you're in Delhi and married to a beautiful wife who's a photographer and also multi-talented in unreasonable ways. So you may talk about anything else outside of this.
Right. So thanks to my wife. I knew this question was coming because she logged in and checked out your previous videos and told me what I was expected to answer. So yeah, I think taking off from what you said about economics in college, one thing I really enjoy doing is math. And so large parts of my day, which are not involving work, involve math. I do various types of math puzzles. I do a lot of fantasy sports, or fantasy football, fantasy cricket, all of which is essentially math. So yeah, that's the one thing that takes up my day that's not work.
That's a great answer. And I suppose it makes sense that you've also designed your day job around this right now. So it's good for you. Dinoo, how would you talk about what you do and where you're from? It's very nice to have you here because I've been curious about your work for half a decade now, if not longer than that. I know that you were with the Competition Commission of India for some time and you work with a firm now. So there's you clearly have a perspective on how to think about these questions from more than one angle. So don't talk about that, but talk about anything else.
Well, my answer, Badri, is going to sound a little shallow, given what my predecessors have said. But I'm using this lockdown as an opportunity to find interest outside of what I do. Apart from competition law and knowing competition practitioners like Yaman, I'm using it as a time to delve in the arts and crafts. So I pick up small projects around the house to keep myself busy. I think as a lawyer itself, when you are so focused on a certain kind of analytical ability, sometimes it's important to switch off to try other interests. Another task that I have taken upon myself is to bake birthday cakes for every one of my friends that has a birthday. So we will see how that food poisoning plays out in the months to come.
to be decided, to be seen. But thanks for that answer, Dinoo. I like all the best with your alternative pursuits. The other man here, Akash, is someone who I've known now for like 5 or 6 years. We haven't really, every time we've hung out, we've ended up having longer conversations than we expected to, which is why we don't meet very often anymore. also I shifted out of being next to his office for a long time. Aruj had put us in touch, I think, like back in 2014 or so.
I guess, yeah.
Yeah, this is way before you went through your Series B and like the drama before that and all kinds of things associated with it. So Akash here is a co-founder of Instamojo. He's also one of the chillest and richest in the context of his life. Like committed pursuit of alternative pursuits, and it's great to have him here. He's much more than an entrepreneur. So it's Akash. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself outside of your work?
Well, I don't know outside of my work because I'm the same person at work or outside, right? So I don't see there's any difference in me. And in fact, that's the only bit I enjoy about my work. Like it lets me be myself, and it still enables me to keep pursuing the things which I want to, which is just about learning new things, figuring out and keep thinking, right? I think that's part of being a founder, right? Today our role involves being at a much higher level, having this 360-degree view of things, keep thinking about long-term and second-order effects. So I think that's what I keep doing, right? Be it at office, be it at home or otherwise. So yeah, I don't know if that really helps, but yeah, I'm pretty much the same person. What I do enjoy is like I enjoy reading, I enjoy football. So there are a few things which I keep doing, right? And I make it a point that I take out time for these. So yeah, lockdown does make a difference, at least on the football front, right? But everything else, I think it's been pretty much the same.
That's a great answer, Akash. But also, I thought you would talk about poker and playing cricket inside your office. This is, I feel like I might have struck a nerve there, but maybe that was the answer to the question.
No, it's actually
this. I was just about to say.
It's good that you brought up poker. So. So it's good that you brought up poker because I think it's been, at least 2 or 3 years that I did not play poker. Just basically lost touch of, whoever I used to play with. But I think in the lockdown, finally, all of our older college friends, they made this, virtual, like whatever, like through one of these poker apps. So I started playing poker just a couple of weeks back. So this is after a few years. So yeah, maybe there might be a game tonight. I'll see. So yeah, I think that's one thing, right? I kind of missed. I always wanted a good company for it because I think it's much more than a game, right? It's a lot of thinking involved, or there are a lot of gamesmanship to it. So yeah, I'm also enjoying a reincarnation of my poker days, if I call it. Not that I'm any good at it.
This, I like your answer because it's so true that your work and your life sort of integrates very neatly into each other. You've always been the guy who nourishes community, right? Like set up the system to enable it. And Instamojo's mission as a payment processor, it's not just a payment processor. It's a platform for small businesses to find ways to empower themselves. Payment processing just happened to be the first way in which they started doing that. Now you're working with millions of stores. So it's really fundamentally important that you're here on this conversation. So look forward to whatever you have to say here on, at least, so thanks for joining us. So let me kick off with the first question that I have for all of you, which is, so the title of this session is on the publicness of private companies. All of you ask me, what is that about? It doesn't sound like it's within any disciplinary boundaries as such, because life obviously is not within disciplinary boundaries. So we'll go around the room, and I want to hear your thoughts on the publicness of private companies. My own opinion is that there's no act that can ever take place in society which is entirely private, except if it's alone by yourself in your bedroom, right? And even that, it's questionable whether it's a truly private act. We've thought about, it's an old idea that suicide is seen as society's anomaly as opposed to an individual's act, right? So for me personally, it's obvious that there's no necessary action which you can take place without having some kind of public import. And I think it's important for us to reflect on this because we end up behaving like fiefdoms with interests without necessarily noticing the implications of our actions on a wider society. So we thought it would be interesting to ask this question, especially now, because post-COVID, you see a lot of companies and the individuals who make them, obviously being humane, want to achieve humane aspirations. They want to see how they can use the company's resources, their time, their skills to support other people. So we thought now is a good time to reflect on the reinvention of capitalism based on these aspirations. So let's just go around the room and try to understand how each of you feels about this idea. Sir, we'll start with you and then go on. We'll probably go on the same order, but let's see how the responses are, and then we'll know whether to shift it around in the interest of coherence.
Sure, Badri, thanks. So as you said, Badri, I was a little puzzled, of course, when you mentioned this topic. And then I did some thinking and I realized how actually important this topic is. But just to put it in context, a couple of days back, I came across a full page ad in the Hindu newspaper. It was a mall which was saying, basically an ad which was saying, we want you to come eat, drink, shop, and be merry. Okay, that was in bold. And then in fine small print, it says below that because the jobs of many of our workers depend on this, right? Now we are speaking of a mall, which is we're not exactly talking about, something which is providing an essential service or something like that. But this is a mall which is desperate to get back on track and is pointing out that several jobs, depend upon us getting back into this sort of consumerist behavior, right? Now, just that in itself sort of explains to us the connection between private enterprise and public. In a very simple sense, the very economics of this establishes that, see, no private enterprise can survive if there's no public to consume a good. So there's a deep, that's that fundamental thing. You cannot exist if you do not have people to consume your goods, right? Now, when we speak about consumption and therefore the creation of jobs and creation of further jobs, and so that they have further income and further consumption, fueling, the private sector growth and profits, one big thing that hinders us is the fact that there's a great degree of unemployment and inequality that exists, right? So we are speaking of 1% of India's population having 22% of the income, or 1% having 34% of the wealth in the case of India. And then we wonder if this 1% consuming so much is actually trickling down to the bottom to create enough jobs and therefore consumption, which they desperately want, because the whole private sector growth is dependent upon consumption, right? Now that's not happening. Several studies have shown that this sort of, very narrow percentage of the population drawing, upon a huge amount of consumption is not going to help in creating, in the long run, a sustainable consumer-driven economy, right? Whether we like it or not, whether we like the fact that 60% of the total national income or expenditure is driven by consumption and all of it, whether we like it or not, it is a fact. So it is in the private sector's interest to see how, we can move out of this unsustainable model to a more sustainable model where there is more broad-based growth, in the sense that there's more equity and distribution in terms of income and wealth. Now, this may seem a bit of a puzzle. What's the private sector got to do with it? Firstly, let me again emphasize, the private sector has to see everything in this as in its interest. It's in its complete interest to ensure that there's more broad-based income distribution, because once you have more broad-based income distribution, you have sustainable growth in consumption and the profits, which motivates private sector firms, right? So I'll just stop with that, and I'll let others.
That's actually a great point to stop at. It reminds me of this, of what Jayati Basu, I'm not sure if I'm Jayati Ghosh says about consumption. He says that we need the Indian economy to be a consumer-driven economy. That means enabling more and more people to be consumers. And the point you made about income distribution is subtle because it applies to your labor as well. So when you're running an enterprise, you're also talking about enabling your employees to be consumers, to be able to generate wealth and equity in your enterprise. So actually, instead of following the regular order, let's go to Akash next, because you're speaking about entrepreneurs at a slightly larger scale, and Akash deals with millions of much smaller entrepreneurs who who are individuals, often, very often, predominantly individuals, I think, but he can tell us more about it. So yeah, so I think he would have a slightly like adjacent take on this question. So Akash, you want to go next?
Yeah, so I think that's a great point, sir. And in fact, that's something I myself also, think about or worry about. See, so I don't relate it strictly to consumerism, right? Of course, that is needed, or you need to drive up. What concerns is the fact that the inequality is growing, right? You have, like you said, right, 1% people, 1% of the population have X% distribution or X% of the money, right? So that that what's been happening today is it's been growing and the disparity has been growing. It's happening the world over. And one of the trends, and that's why I keep thinking is, so we are in this space where we help small businesses come online, right? The fact is there is internet, there is technology. As a business to grow, to prosper, you have to get online today, and you have to make use of all the best technology and tools out there for your business. So now the thing is, just the fact that you adopt technology doesn't really enable you. In the sense, today more and more, right? If you look at what the globally, which are the Fortune top 100 companies or top 500 companies, and till 2000s, that list, of course, that list keeps changing, but there was a certain stability in it. Towards the turn of the millennium, that list was dominated by your big oil majors and a few banks. If you look at the list today, it's dominated by your top tech companies, right? It's about Alphabet and Apple and Microsoft and Amazon's, right? So all of these have essentially come up in the last couple of decades, right? And not even a couple of decades. It's over the last decade that they've really got into this spiral, right? Like become this snowball where they keep growing, they keep, swallowing everything which comes in their way. And that trend is only, getting like much more emphasized today. So the challenge that we're seeing as such is these businesses, just because of internet, because of technology, because of the inherent network effects which are present there, which were not there without the internet earlier, right? They are getting bigger and bigger, and it's much more difficult for a small business or anyone else to actually compete with them. So that's what we keep thinking, right? How do we enable these businesses? Like, yeah, it's simple. I'll help you come online. I'll help you, let's say, give you your website or collecting payments. Yeah, those are small things, right? But in the longer scheme of things, while the economy would really do well if there are millions of, say, $1 million companies than a few hundred, or like a few dozens of billion-dollar companies, right? So how do we keep enabling these small businesses? And I think capitalism as a model, it has shown that it is, let's say, so far the most efficient one that we've seen, but in no ways is the ideal model, right? I think we're at a point where, from, let's say, from a political space, right, we're in this democratic system. From an economic space, we're in a capitalist system. Yes, both of them, I think we are touching the limits in terms of, I think it's been proven that, yeah, these are better than the earlier things, or there's a communism is no match for it, right? That's been a proven failure. So now capitalism is a proven failure today, right? But we are hitting those levels where, yeah, it seems to be more and more inefficient, right? And I think we really have to touch upon the fact that, and again, I don't know if that's a part of the discussion today, right? But essentially, what are the incentives at play here? Is let's say an entrepreneur out there, right? Is this person really thinking of what are they thinking about, right? Are you looking at maximizing your value today? Are you doing what's good for your company? Of course, yeah, that's what all of us are doing. The fact that what we are doing, it has a bigger play on the society, on the environment. Are we factoring that or not, right? And how do we actually ensure that some of those incentives come into play? That's that's what every company should be. And so when again when Badri sent this topic, right, the publicness of private companies, again I was at a total loss, right? And I kept thinking in a couple of ways. Like, one thing I was thinking is, yeah, we as a startup, we are a private company, right? Publicness, I don't know, but in some sense, everything that we do is public. And especially in this age, right, with so much of technology and social media, everything that we do, right, with the fact that you might take a small decision in your company and you have no idea how it would, let's say, come out, get exposed to media, or some journalist would pick up. And it's not even that, right? There are enough of anonymous other websites, where these things spread. So are we really public or not? We don't know. But one thing is, the lot of these incentives which are very, very private, how can those incentives be public, like be for the greater good.
That Akash, that's like so true. I was just about to point out that it's also reflecting your product choices, because I think from about 2017 onwards, 2018 maybe, when you started opening up like logistics, credit, all these other services. Most recently, Kata, Kata book was a separate startup, but you've noticed that like it still is, but the fact of providing credit is something that's been added on as a feature on most like fintech platforms. Right? It's becoming increasingly clear that essentially you're trying to create a marketplace which is based on the principles that you think are just.
Right.
So that's really obvious in the product choices you've been making over time. And I've also enjoyed it because, we are customers of Instamojo together, and I've always felt like enabled by a platform as opposed to disabled by it. So I think that's a nice counterpoint to what Professor Somashekar said just now. Next, it's great that we have Yaman and Dinoo here because they worked on the regulatory side as well as the large companies and small companies, right? And we'll go with Dinoo next because we were just talking earlier this morning about maybe it's better if you speak first and then I add anything more about it. But to put it synoptically, at least without taking anything away from what you're about to say, we were talking about how competition is really about making sure that everyone has access to participating in this economy, right? It's first, to be monopolistic, in my opinion, is anti-competitive. To come in the way of another other entities flourishing is anti-competitive behavior, right? It's not to say that you want to take away from the expansion of a large company. There are spaces where it's justified, and to me, at least, when we look at Google and all that, I think of them as quasis. Even Zoom, to a certain extent, because performing important functions on the internet, which would not have made life possible. Look at late night television has basically become another YouTube channel. How insane is this? This is enabled by the fact that Google runs YouTube, and it's achieved the scale and network effects that it has. And I can't agree more with you, Akash, when you say that we need hundreds of millions of dollar companies as opposed to a few large, because that doesn't create wealth across society. It's the same kind of wealth creation that we've seen with the first generation of capitalism, late 90s, through the 80s, 90s, which is just extractive of labor. But now you're just extractive in the sense of resource allocation. So there's not really much in my mind to distinguish between, say, like a large tech company and an oil company. It sounds a bit provocative, but really that's it's trying to make there's something as opposed to make a point. But yeah, sorry, someone wanted to say something.
Sure, that's a large number of topics actually that we just covered in the last 3 minutes. So, but let's try to go one by one, right? So, the concept that you can't have a private enterprise be truly private. This concept of a state entity and a private entity, that the private entity is solely motivated by profit making and therefore is in an isolated silo itself, and the state only looks at public interest objectives and therefore operates in that silo. I don't think that's really true. The two have to interact. They interact in a market to make products and services for consumers. There's employment. There's all sorts of considerations. So but that being said, a competitive economy is one that ideally works for all. You're not looking at consolidation just at the top level. You're looking at a market that works well for consumers as well as the players in the market. So, in this sense, like what Akash said, right? If you look at the names of the top 10 companies 20 years ago and the names of the top 10 companies as on date, or let's say 2-3 years ago, that list has broadly differed with the exception of 1 or 2 really big guys. It's gone from your giants to now your tech giants, what your big four are, your Gap are, your Google, Apple, Amazon, and Facebook. There's a lot of talk also about whether we should regulate these companies. How should we regulate them? Do we let them be? Does the invisible hand of the market correct their behavior? There's lots of theories on that front. So far, what I would say is that unless there is demonstrable harm, there is really, it's a bit too interventionist, especially for a country like India to take such a call. Of course, despite looking at the welfare of Indian consumers and the Indian economy at large as well, there are a whole host of considerations. No other country has done that really till date. And so to imagine that that sort of interventionist policy would be taken in our country is a bit large, is a bit of a stretch. I also like the think that technology is a huge democratizer, like Instamojo itself. For example, that platform has enabled access to payment gateways for smaller businesses. So it's not necessary that your one big bad guy, or let's say your 4 big bad guys are going to dominate forever. It's a question of how their conduct plays out over a few years is going to be viewed, scrutinized, and what best can be done to tackle that.
You want to say some more? We'll be happy to hear what it means for you to say how best to tackle that. Because that's really where the meat of this debate is. Feel free to speak a few more sentences, because it'll sort of help us understand how you're evaluating this as things stand.
Sorry, Badri, was that to me?
Yeah, that was to you.
Oh, I'm sorry, could you please repeat what you just said? Sorry, my internet connection is not the best.
Yeah. So you closed off by saying how best to regulate these companies. I was just suggesting that you speak 1 or 2 sentences so we understand your position on it a little better.
Okay.
That's where, and then we'll go on to Yaman.
Sure. Typically, the market conduct of entities is regulated, overseen by competition law. Yaman and I have been competition practitioners. That said, it's competition law, also known as antitrust, which looks at promoting the conditions of competition in the market. So you're not protecting competitors, you're enabling, to the extent possible, a level playing field for enterprises to achieve efficient allocation of resources. Over a period of time, we had the Competition Commission of India established in the early 2000s, and they're a body that discharges its regulatory activities. We've had a whole host and variety of cases. We've gone from stock exchanges to online search to maternity services, and so it's a wide spectrum. It's sector agnostic, but those are the rules of the game. It's an evolving discipline, and what I find personally very interesting, and maybe Yaman and Professor Somashekar, you have something to say about this. As a country, our competition law is fairly nascent. It's something that has been enforced at least only for the last 11 odd years, if I take away the MRTP. But in other countries and more developed economies, you've had them for at least 60, 70 years. In the case of the US, for at least 110 odd years. So the nature of the game, the rules of the game are evolving, and as is the nature of everything in India, we are also trying to keep up to ensure that the regulator, to the extent possible, makes market corrections where necessary, but also does not become too interventionist.
Right.
I have a little question there. Sorry. So you mentioned that in India, the competition laws or the entire structure is a little nascent today. But in the other countries as well, right? I mean, it might be well developed, but it's not that the aims are the same, right? So like there are different ways to look at it. In some cases, are you protecting, let's say, customers? Are you safeguarding the interest of a customer or the end user? In cases, are you safeguarding competition? Because they're 2 different things. So from that perspective, where do you think India lies, or rather, where should India lie?
Absolutely, the objectives of our Competition Act are quite different to that of other jurisdictions. In fact, any competition lawyer will tell you that the aims and objectives have changed every 20, 30 years in other countries. So we are looking today, our competition law is very consumer welfare based. It's set out in the very preamble. It is the basis on which the entire act is almost seen, interpreted, enforced. So it's consumer welfare at the outset. And there is an element of a total welfare standard also, is the lens that one would implement and give effect to the Competition Act. We don't look at protecting competitors. It's about fostering conditions of competition to ensure that as efficient competitors can function in the market. Yaman, do you want to add any to that? As a competition
I was just about to say that. And just for context, right? I remember with Professor Somashekar, when we studied competition, sir, you started us off with the Sherman Act of 1890 in the United States, right? That's where we first started thinking about competition in the legislative kind of context. Of course, it developed further. Akash, your question is totally on point. In fact, the next 1.5 hours, 1 hour now, is all about this. And you're going to keep coming back to this question, which is, what does it mean to foster competition? Does it mean, as you're suggesting, enable customers? Does it mean enabling businesses? Do these have to be contradictory to each other? Are they really in the same direction or not? I can't think of a better person than Yaman to close out this first round of questions, because he's worked with companies of all scales. So this is right up his alley. And he also regularly deals with international legislations of all sorts, so this is, look forward to your answer, Yaman.
Thanks. So, what Dinoo said is essentially the start of my competition law course, right? As in, the first thing you talk about is what is competition law, why competition law, and really the real question there is, what is the purpose that a competition authority sets out to achieve when it sets up a law and then starts implementing it? And different competition authorities have answered that question differently. The same authorities answered it differently over time. The Indian authority in the last 10 years, it doesn't take 2 decades to change our mind. The Indian authority in the last 10 years has answered it differently on in different situations and cases and things like that. The motto of the competition authority is to make markets work for consumers. So I guess from that perspective, they are looking at it from a consumer welfare standard. But then what is in the best interest of a consumer? Is it always the lowest price, or is it sometimes the fostering of a competitor where there's value in having more than one player in the market? Is it always short-term immediate, or is it, are we looking at overall effect of a transaction or a practice over time? There's all these sorts of decisions that go into deciding how an authority must examine its fundamental principle that it wants to make markets work for consumers, and then apply it to the facts of a particular case. I'd also like to take off from a couple of other things that Dinoo said, which I agree with fully, right? The first is that the internet is an incredible democratizer of business, of access in a lot of ways, and also just for people. And this is from everything from Twitter being used to run revolutions in the Middle East with Arab Spring, to home businesses across the world functioning out of their own 2-bedroom flats, making $1 million companies essentially, because of the power and spread of the internet, right? Selling products, selling services online, and making themselves available to people across the world. And that's what the internet does for you. That's what the internet provides. And I think that's and the power of that also is that you need less public scrutiny of private conduct when private conduct is enabling more private conduct, right? So where you have immense private competition as a result of global equalizers like the internet, there's less need for public intervention to slow down the big companies that are sort of creating what you described at the start as monopolies in a loose manner of speaking. And that also takes me to the second thing that I like to fully agree with Dinoo on, which is the idea of a demonstrable harm, right? So where you talk about there are these large companies, and is it better to have $1 million companies, or I think the math is 1,000 billion dollar companies? And I had to do that, right? No? So I think the idea is they're both great models, and you should have. It's better to have whatever organically evolves, because that's how the incentives align, right? And as far as private incentives are concerned, the real difference between a public company and a private company is the incentives in which they operate. Both sets of companies operate for a profit motive. I think it's probably inaccurate to say that public companies today are out there doing only social service. That's not their purpose of existence. That's why governments set up enterprises to run businesses. It's so that they can run on a slightly separate profit motive, right? However, their incentives are slightly different. They've got more on their mind than just making a profit, or they feel that making a profit isn't necessarily the only way to achieve all the goals of a state, right? And we are at least partly in still a welfare state, and the state therefore definitely has obligations and incentives that go beyond making profit. So as far as that is concerned, I see a difference in the way private enterprise should and could function. Having said that, of course, from the lens that I work on, which is competition law, there is a lot that private enterprises have to contribute in terms not just of what they do, but what they don't do to sort of grow businesses, grow industries, grow the market. And that's really where intervention comes in. Do you look at demonstrable harm? Do you see what's really changed as a consequence of the internet, of technology growing, and how does that impact how businesses should be looked at and how regulators should look at them?
Sure. Yaman, that's a great answer. And we're going to unpack this a little further in the next question that I want to ask all of you. Because you spoke about access, you spoke about what the internet has done to all of this. And Akash, we feel really lucky to have you here, man, because we can talk about this conceptually, but here you are designing markets. So my next question to all of you, and we'll start with Akash responding to this. And I think, Yaman, all of you have partially answered it, but I want you to be like super specific now when you're answering this question, which is, now imagine you're designing a market today, right? What is your first priority going to be, right? Your priority could be manifold. You could say labor is my priority, equality is my priority. I mean, you could say profit making is my priority, enabling profit making and wealth generation is a priority. There are many reasonable answers to this. So I'm very curious about your response to that. In the context of what Yaman just said, I want to make one small clarification in case viewers don't have context necessarily. He distinguished between private companies and public companies. So public companies are listed companies which have higher governance norms. They're owned by the public at large, in that anyone can...
Sorry.
It's okay.
I meant government companies, not public listed companies. Sorry.
Right. Okay. It was
state-owned companies. Thanks.
Right. I just wanted to clarify that because I thought you referred to all three of those. In my imagination, at least, it seemed like this one. So here's coming back to the question: first priority when you're trying to design a fair market. Yeah. Feel free to disagree because I mean, there's no reasonable opinion you can share. If you're going to only share something that everyone can agree with, then it's really not worth saying. So. Please suggest something that's not necessarily obvious. Akash, we'll start with you.
Oh man, this is like a really big one. You really threw this at me, right? I mean, I have absolutely no idea on this.
Akash, you've dealt with worse. Yeah. You've dealt with much worse. I remember seeing Sampath's post right after you got your Series B, and you were talking about the level of pain I can't even comprehend. You know, like when you're sitting in a position where the entire company might be melting. A question like this is nothing. What's the big deal?
I think that's simple, right? When you're dealing with your own thing, it doesn't matter if everything melts away. It's just you who's feeling, right? But talking about a market or a ecosystem at large, that's a big thing. But see, if you ask me, if I would design from scratch, what the structure would be, I can't think of specific laws or something at this point. What I would look at is what are the principles that I value, right? And everything has to fall in line with that. So what are those basic fundamental principles that we should be thinking of? I think those should be, at least in my view, right? It's about individual liberty, the fact that anyone should be free to, like, starting a company or basically, or rather say competing for consumer attention, for resources, all of it, that should be accessible to all, right? So there shouldn't be many impediments to that. I think that is one. Couple of other principles that I would look at is sustenance of, like, environment is a topic which I think about a lot, right? So I think environment, right? So safeguarding some of those things, safeguarding the dignity of people. I think it's just about that. So balancing between, so what are the things that you want to encourage? It's about freedom. It's about a lot of people coming in. If it's, let's say, if a company is not working, wind up, right? Basically make all of those things simple. At the same time, safeguard certain things, which is life, dignity, and the environment. So all laws should be in line with that, right? So I think those would be my foundation principles, and everything should flow from that.
Okay, that's a basket of principles. I think it's a fair response. Like, you've actually had to build a market, so you're not going to interrogate you on ranking those in order of preference. But I'll actually take the idea of dignity, because I think that was an overarching sort of principle, because it's the same kind of dignity that you'd extend to the environment as you would to, say, labor and other businesses and participation. Like, dignity is all about acknowledgement, right? So the capacity of a market to acknowledge its participants is the first duty of the market. If I were to summarize what you just said in one sentence. Somashekar, sir, what do you think of as the first priority of a market?
Very nice question, Badri, and I think Akash gave a very nice reply too. See, one of the things that I have always emphasized upon when, in those odd circumstances, startups come across to me, asking me for some help, I emphasize that anything that you create has to have social value. See, you cannot create a product which is out there with a primary motive of profit. Your primary motive must be to create a product or a service which really adds to consumer welfare. Right now, I'll give you an example of a product which is a disaster. ULIPs, unit-linked insurance policies. Now, when these ULIPs were started in India, the way in which they were designed, the way in which they were marketed, was not at all in the interest of consumers.
So can you just explain that so that, I mean, like our viewers, we have no context. Let's assume we have no context whatsoever.
So unit-linked insurance policies are basically insurance policies which are linked to market performance of investments. And these investments are basically made in stock markets. Now, they on the one hand, they offer you an insurance life cover, a base life cover, and then they give you returns based on your investment performance in the stock market. So the way in which they were marketed was essentially that you would get returns of 20% and above per annum, which was absolute bunkum, right? Now, the entire purpose of this product and the way in which it was created was to give a huge percentage to those intermediaries who would sell them, or rather oversell them, as well as to the insurance policy companies. Now, if you look at the way in which that has gone, it has gone south. ULIPs are no longer the toast of the insurance companies, or they're not even the toast of mutual fund companies. So the first and most important thing for anyone who's out there is to create a product which has social value. Now, I tried to look up companies which did really well while thinking of social value and not profits directly. Now, I'll digress a little bit. Now, there is what you call as the Obliquity Principle. Now, this is by a UK professor, I'm forgetting his name. He coined this term, which essentially means that you don't aim for happiness or whatever you want directly, but rather you get it indirectly. The way in which you get it indirectly is by rather focusing on what you really like to do and how you can add value to society. And in an oblique manner, you actually achieve what you may also want, profits. Two fantastic examples were given in this particular article. One was, I think it was Handelsbank in Sweden. Now, this is a bank which tends to never cross-sells products which it feels are bad for its customers. Customers come, they want a deposit and they want something else. And, cross-selling essentially means that if you notice that A is interested in a tie, then A would also be interested in a shirt. Now, this sort of cross-selling happens. If you look at your e-commerce portals, there are always suggestions saying, okay, you bought this, then people who bought this also bought this, without really wondering if the person would really like it, to push them into buying something which they may really not want. Now, this is a bank which chose its ethics, followed ethics very, very minutely. And they say, we will not cross-sell until the customer really likes it and we feel the customer will benefit. Now, this bank did not pursue profits. Neither did another company, a pharmaceutical company called ISI. All right. Now, this bank has added 1.9 million times value to its shares since 1900. And that is the highest ever. And there's this other company called ISI, which took it to vote among the shareholders and asked them this simple question. Look, should we have a profit motive or should we have a social motive? Apparently 75% of its voters said, let's go for a social motive. And that company is doing really well. So what I would say is any company out there, whatever you want to do, if you can create a product which people really appreciate, which people really want, and it adds to the welfare, and you're not just trying to sell it for the sake of squeezing them and making a profit, then you're bound to do well.
So that's a great response. And both the examples that you suggested are great. I think like companies should model themselves more and more like religions and cults. You see this most with very large companies, right? In the sense that cults and religions can last hundreds of years. And this is also true of like Japanese companies, which have similar principles of self-organizing, which has allowed them to have companies of immensely, just a significant like temporal context, if not necessarily in terms of shareholder value. That you said like shareholder wealth was also associated with social good was very nice. The confusion that I have though in your answer is like determining what social value is very difficult, even based on the principle that you stated, right? Like much like defining essential care is very difficult because toothbrushes are essential, but you're not going to see toothbrush. We didn't see toothbrush manufacturers being open in the first wave of the lockdown, right? So like distinguishing between what is and what isn't essential is difficult, but I do understand your point if I were to cast it as being on a spectrum, which is so long as you're able to ask the question of what is the social value, so long as you're able to ask the question of how to amplify the value of your product or service in the economy, it is a valuable enterprise. And it also reminds me of another idea, which is basically that all innovation is process innovation. There's no such thing as product innovation. You set up the systems which are going to continuously generate more and more products which are based on that philosophy, right? And you're just making that point once again, which is that if I can't understand that the priority is social value, then how do you expect me to create products which have that kind of value in society? And I suppose this takes off very nicely from what Akash was saying, because he was describing what his social values are, right? And in a certain way, you were making the meta point here. Yaman next, simply because we talk about large companies and both of you know a lot about large companies. How do you think about your first priority when you're designing a market?
Right. So fortunately, don't have to design markets, but only check that they're working. It's much easier than actually designing one, and so kudos to people who are actually doing that. As I see it, the one thing that's probably most important in my mind for a market to function well is symmetry and information available. Because I think the greatest cause for market failure in the examples that we have seen, at least, is an information asymmetry. And I think ULIPS is actually a great example of that. It was this, at the time, it was this new complicated product that people didn't understand very well, but were told that there is a 20% return on investment likely, with the line at the bottom that mutual fund investments are subject to market risk. Please read the offer documents carefully before investing. Said at a speed faster than even I speak, so entirely pointless. And people sort of fell for it because it sounded good. People didn't quite understand what it was, and they said, okay, this is something that might work. And it was that lack of information really that led to a bad product becoming very popular and costing a lot of money and eventually failing. So I think using that just as an example, to my mind, the most important thing in making a market work successfully for everyone involved is a symmetry in the levels of information available.
So, Yaman, could you say more about what information asymmetry means to you? Because it means different things to different people. To me, for instance, I believe I come from a worldview where knowledge should be free even if information is not free, right? In the sense that everyone has intellectual property that you're protecting, but access to knowledge, access to systems needs to be like fundamentally and abundantly available. This includes like access to, say, for entrepreneurs, access to credit, access to libraries, parks, museums, anything that can spark off creativity and inspiration to make new stuff. So when you say information asymmetry, can you just like put a finer point on it?
Sure. I meant that in a slightly different sense. I have somewhat similar views on sort of access to knowledge as you do. I think it's valuable that the state ensure that people have access to levels of knowledge that spark the kind of creativity you're talking about. But when I say information asymmetry in a transactional sense, What I mean is that both sides of that transaction should have information about that transaction available to them. So in the ULIP example, people should understand the product. People should understand why it is being claimed that a 20% return is possible, and that will also give them the information involved as to how likely or unlikely that 20% return actually is, right? I'm just using the example because it's easier to explain with an example. What I mean when I say information is information symmetry, rather, is in a transaction, both sides being equally aware of what that transaction entails. And that also goes back to Professor Somashekhar's cross-selling example, right? So when a website tells you that people who bought something have also bought something else, they're able to do that because they have that information. You may not have the same information about what they know, but broadly, everyone having a similar level of information when executing a transaction about that transaction. You obviously want to know what everyone else knows otherwise.
Fair enough. So just to once again, we say you're speaking of it from this consumer protection aspiration. And in a certain way, it's basically that the line between a recommendation and coercion is very fine. Actually, it's not a line, it's a zone, right? So that makes the job much trickier. For instance, for Akash, I imagine that cross-selling from store to store and even upselling other products within the same store is almost a duty. He has to do it because that's how, I mean, both in terms of their profit motive, as well as the health of the ecosystem they're building is directly linked to that. So thanks to that point, I think it's a very fair point on information symmetry, not necessarily just in the context of a competition dispute, but in the context of consumer awareness, this Jago Grahak, Jago kind of aspiration. Akash, you want to say something about it, or should we just move to Dinoo at this point?
So the only thing is this example, right, of ULIP, is this really a case of information asymmetry, or is it, maybe just about fraudulent practices? Of course, does the product have a social value or not is a different question, but is it just about fraudulent practices? Like as a different example, a lot of folks, we go and consume cornflakes, right? And for many of them, cornflakes is a very healthy product, like, healthy breakfast and all of it. But in real terms, it's not. It's like terrible, right? It's totally not good for you. And the entire industry of breakfast and cornflakes came out of this marketing machine, if I call it. So is there information asymmetry over there? Yes, I think information asymmetry would always be there. And if you are in this information age, the amount of information you have or the amount of lengths you go to keep yourself informed is what makes a difference ultimately. So I don't know. I mean, asymmetry will always be there. It's just that, I don't know if that's like, is that something that can ever be controlled, or even if it should be controlled?
Okay, fair enough. And we'll just pause on that. Let Dinoo give us her spin, and then we can reactivate this thread of conversation, because like information itself is so broad that we can speak about it for hours, right? But Dinoo, your turn.
Yeah, actually, my answer is predicated by what actually everybody has said, because I never thought of what would I want to build in a perfect market, and I think it borrows elements from all of you, which I would like to sum up as responsibility. In any market as such, you need to have responsible stakeholders, responsible consumers, responsible producers. So to Akash's point that, when I'm making a product, I'm also thinking about the environment, but as a consumer also, when you're ordering a pair of socks at 12 o'clock at midnight, are you thinking about whether or not it comes to you in bubble wrap and wrapped in all that cardboard? Are you thinking about also environmental impact of that? So it's responsibilities on both sides of the chain. I think both from a consumer perspective as well as a producer perspective, responsibility I think would be key. Dignity of employees I think will flow with that, right? Do I want to treat all my employees packed in sardines in such a way that they don't have any, or do I not pay enough tax? Do I offshore operations in such a way that, technically it seems like I'm not playing fairly? So responsibility, I think, is an underlying theme that would help. I think if we are, however, to be practical, not every entity or stakeholder in the game is going to be responsible in and of themselves. And I think that's where you have the state that steps in. You have different forms of, and when I mean state that steps in, I mean you have different government bodies or entities or regulators, whatever you call, who can look at tax law, who can look at employment welfare, who can look at, let's say, competition, environmental concerns, or in a place like India with public utilities, you could also look at regulatory commissions for telecom, for electricity, and what have you. So I think if a great feature or characteristics that we could take in our own selves and as well as with every transaction we have in the market to act a little responsibly, that may lead to a lot more long-term welfare than short-term gain.
Oh, that's a great point. It also tells us a little bit about why large tech company, big tech, is basically saying let's self-regulate, because it's likely that the nature of regulation is going to get. I mean, it might be more invasive than they desire. But the point I'm taking away from you is that we all need to engage in Atmanirbharta and self-regulation with the aspiration of participating fairly in the market, not, to think like a regulator when you're behaving. And I think that sort of reflects back on the theme of this conversation, which is basically that we have to realize our publicness and be careful about how our publicness behaves. So essentially, you're instigating us to think about self-regulation as an aspiration for ourselves, right? So, okay, that is a great response, all of you. Now, one question that I want to ask all of you is the reverse of this question. Yeah. So, you are running an ideal market, and what is the one thing that you would eliminate from it? Try not to pick something that you've already said. So if you come and say like, we shouldn't have information asymmetry, Yaman, because this is the strategy that you've taught us to use, deploy in debates. So you have to be guard yourself against saying this. But one thing that you think that you would prevent in markets that you design, right? So Akash, we'll start with you because I think it also ties with the point that you started making about information just before this.
Sure. So I think if you don't have to touch upon the earlier points, I think we keep coming, natural tendencies to go back to those. But if we have to not touch upon them, I think one thing I definitely want to avoid is maybe rent-seeking behavior, right? So like you don't get to do things just because you've been there, right? But essentially, in some way, you have to keep competing, right? And that's something which has been not happening or been failing if you look at the economics today.
So can you speak a little more about how you actually do it? It'll be very cool if you can speak about preventing rent-seeking behavior when you have to behave like a regulator, within your marketplace. And it's actually a super interesting and important question because so many large companies right now are platform companies in that they enable other businesses. That's how they increase their own equity, right? Whether you're talking about Amazon or Dunzo or you guys. I know I'm putting you all in the same bucket, maybe because of your NPS course, but but even otherwise, if we were to think about, okay, what are the things you would do? So maybe we'll extend the question a little bit to say, what are 2 or 3 things that you would do to disable rent-seeking behavior? What does rent-seeking behavior look like in your particular context? And what rent-seeking behavior, like the small companies have to do some rent-seeking, right? If there is the hustle is important with smaller companies. When large companies hustle, it's very ugly, but small companies do need to. So can you just speak a little more about that?
So I don't have an answer to that really. What I can think of is like, and again, I come from very much from a tech perspective, right? Because that's the space you operate in. So some bit of it may not be applicable to the broader industry as such. But like, let's say, for example, today, no matter what you do, right? Let's say if you talk about some of these bigger tech companies, or you talk about someone like a Jio in India, or all the other names that we spoke about, very easy that, you start off something, like as a small guy, you start off something, and one of these Goliaths come and they just acquire you. Or let's say not even acquire you, right? Very easy for them to deploy a small team, make this small feature, leverage the existing amounts of, distribution or user base or capital which they have, and throw you out of the business, right? And that is something which has been happening. There have been recurring themes around it. So is there a way we can prevent it? I don't know, right? Because at one end, one way to stop that may be in, let's say, curtailing M&A activity for these companies. And again, I think there are laws around it. There is the CCI and others which always look into acquisitions, right? So I think that is something which does happen to an extent. Another way would be to having very clear sort of demarcations in cases, right? That, this is this is the charter, this is the area in which this company is operating, and maybe you cannot go beyond. Now, as an entrepreneur, as someone from as a capitalist mindset, I think that's something which I'm not comfortable at all, right? Which is should not be the case, right? You cannot curtail on my freedom at that. So I think there are odds. I'm very much at odds at it with myself. But in cases, some of these things, might have to come in, right? So let's say you are okay, if you again look at some of these companies, right, let's say an Amazon or others, you have a lot of these. So you essentially, what are you? Are you a platform which is for sellers to reach out to customers, and you sort of being your marketplace which enables these businesses to sell to others, right? And you help them in many different ways. You even drive these customers to them. Now, if that is the space, then should you be having your own private labels, right? Because then you end up competing with your own suppliers, right? Again, I think we've seen laws around this. So the moment you do that, but again, it's always a cat and mouse game, right? There will be more and more ways. The law, I believe, would always be behind. So companies would find ways to jump around, overcome the system. So I don't really have any concrete ways around it, but some of these examples may be very much like some of these what are like violations could be very, very blatant, right? At least let's start with those, and over time find out other ways of overcoming these.
Okay, fair enough. But if you were like actually the M&A activity of the sort that you're talking about, Akash, Yaman, you have to correct me if I'm wrong, but they're too tiny, like just too small for the CCI to be even interested in examining it closely. But I'm not entirely sure. I'll defer to them.
No, an example could be WhatsApp getting acquired by Facebook, right? Now,
that's a large company transaction, right? But you're talking about. I thought from your answer, I was talking about. I thought you were talking about killing the $10 million, $50 million companies, not the $15 billion companies, because there it's more blatant, more obvious. The principle is clearer, but it's much harder to distinguish it in the context that you're speaking about. But I just wanted to like shift the question a little more, and sorry to persist with you here. Yeah. I mean, I'm not sure why I'm apologizing. It's the whole point of this exercise. But I want to ask you how you prevent rent-seeking behavior on your platform. What do you do about it? Like, because like not so much about the market on the whole, because everyone else has a take on it, but you're the only one who's actually running a market. So can you give us an example? I know you've told me a lot about fraud before. I remember we had a conversation about how credit card fraud is very, very difficult. And for you, your distinctive capacity right at the start was your engineering of your security systems, right? And building the trust within your early users. I remember you were telling me about going door to door, doing handouts for your friends in Bombay before you moved into Bangalore to set up the market and to nourish the market. I want to ask you about rents. Is Instamojo just full of like too many small players for you to have rent-seeking behavior, which actually affects someone else's freedom?
No. So see, in our case, that doesn't apply, because essentially we provide a bunch of tools for everyone to do the business, and tools are across the spectrum, right? Across commerce and payments and lending and others. We provide them tools. What we try to, or I won't say try, what we are very sure of, what we don't do is, let's say Badri and Dinoo are, two merchants are using Instamojo to, conduct their business, sell to their customers. What don't do is, Badri is driving some customers to his store, and I'll distract them to go to Dinoo. I'm like, oh, that's not something which you'll do, because these are your customers. You put in that effort, right? I'm not driving these customers to you. So that kind of behavior, I think, is not. And that's I wouldn't say it's not fair or not. I mean, it's the kind of business model you have. In our case, my promise to Badri is, you know what, I'll give you all the set of tools that you need to, basically set your customers, and I charge you basis that. Now, if then your customers come to you, me telling them, go to Dinoo's store, right? Oh, they have some amazing products for you. That's not great, because my primary relationship is with the merchant, is with Badri. It's not with your end customer, right? So I think it's about defining that who is your counterparty, or who is your customer really? Who are you dealing with? And then being true to them. In case of a marketplace, which is what we are not, but in case of a marketplace, that gets a bit fuzzy, because let's say as an Amazon, right, your customers are both, right? It is the end user who's going to purchase a product, as well as the sellers, right? And often their interest, like the things you'll do will not be in the interest of one of them, right? And that is where some of the confusion arises. But it's not strictly rent-seeking behavior at that. I think it might not be the best example of it, but I think that's the kind of practices which the businesses do, right? Rent-seeking behavior would be I mean, I think what we've seen in India over the years, we've seen a lot of that. A lot of bigger firms, just because they're there, just because they have access to capital, or just because they are too big to fail, right? You keep getting those benefits. You keep venturing into areas in which, well, you have no expertise in, right? So it's not that you don't have a right to venture. Yeah, maybe you do, right? But just that unfair advantage which you have, it gets you far ahead of someone who's, let's say, more deserving.
Yeah, and I mean, it's also, I would say, enabled by caste and class in our country. It's funny, I'm not sure if Professor Somashekar can correct me, but I don't know if many other economies have the kind of diversity and richness as we do with family businesses, because many family businesses start off in trade, but they just jump to anywhere where you can make money, right? If you look at the last 50 years, that's been the behavior of family businesses. They work in plastics and food processing. So they're not really unified by a charter that, I mean, I'm saying this from a live example of a very close friend of mine that pull his leg about this all the time, because there's no economic logic beyond profit maximization, which is interesting. But actually, I'd like for Dinoo to go next on this question, because we were just talking about Amazon, and the way you described yourself as enabling the customer is very clear. The reason why in India we have marketplaces, apparently, I put it within, I can put extra quotes as well on top of that, as opposed to single selling units, is to enable fairness. But the minute Amazon's great when it's telling you what all you need to look for. But the minute it participates in that process and sets up basics, undercuts everyone in price, makes use of its production capacity, man, I don't know if that's fair. That doesn't seem right at all. I'm very grateful to Amazon. Amazon's never going to be anti-competitive because they always do the best by the customer. But the minute they come in the way of other entrepreneurs flourishing, it's obviously a more confused kind of situation. But we'll have a much more nuanced take, and I think we'll go to Yaman after that, because he'll have another take on the economics of big companies. So Dinoo?
Sure. So, Badri, without taking names of any particular companies, I think our very basic fear of this is that you have digital platforms that are enabling transactions, right? So they're connecting sellers and customers in retail, online payments, what have you, online platforms. The reason why there is so much nervousness sometimes surrounding digital platforms is actually because a feature of these markets is that they're providing to some extent services for free. So for example, online social media is free, right? Online instant communication is free. So there is a question of where is that recoupment of money taking place, and also to some extent to say what are the rules of the game. So when you have platforms that are connecting different people, and this is, I think, Akash's concern, that if I am the platform, but tomorrow I decide to become a participant in the platform, that I decide to also be a seller of a service, or I have basics or what have you, then isn't that inherently unfair, because it looks like somebody is glomming off my extremely successful business model, right? That said, I would say no, because I think that is the nature of innovation. Of course, conduct is going to define really, to what extent are you leveraging from one activity to the other. But innovation is such that it builds on existing services, right? So today, because let's say somebody tries to, let's say you have the world's biggest online search company and they decide tomorrow to send you Wi-Fi through balloons, hypothetically all. That's a great idea, but is it to say that they shouldn't do it because somebody else is providing Wi-Fi? So it's a careful balancing act, and I'm sorry it doesn't, it's not really going to answer the question. And that is the issue that most lawyers, practitioners, stakeholders, policymakers, government will face. Where do I draw that line between what can be done and what cannot be done? And I think the problem is, if you over-enforce, are you clamping down on innovation? And if you under-enforce, are you leading for corporate exploitation?
Okay, I really don't interpret that answer, as not answering the question, because it feels like what you're suggesting is that it can only be evaluated on a case-by-case basis. It's very difficult to have an organizing principle which says, here we are stifling innovation and here we are not. Like clearly, it seems too nuanced a point to be able to say something so casual the way I am right now. So
it is highly specific, and also ultimately a question of economic principle. Now, one really important point that I think which we need to think about in all of this is the nature of tech is such that the industry changes, consumer demand and supply is changing. So by the time you're looking at something that's an issue, and by the time you're correcting it or saying that this has to be corrected, and then it goes through the legal process, are you going to a place where that entity is no longer the incumbent, right? So it's a lot of different issues that I think all need to work together in order for you to have this competitive marketplace.
Very fair response. Very fair response. I just noticed that it became 9:15. I was like, how the hell did it become 9:15? There's just so many things to talk about, and time wasn't supposed to move to this quickly right now. Yaman, your turn, man. Would you have the same kind of like case-to-case kind of understanding of the system? I would urge you not to, because I urge chaos. But in any case, it would be nice to hear what you have to say about this.
Yeah, so I'm actually going to take off from the last thing that Dinoo said, because I think that's really important in the tech space especially, which is you're often regulating too late, right? So by the time you come up with identifying the relevant theory of harm, and regulators by definition are behind the companies, right? And by the time you do that, you go through the legal process, you're often already beyond the time that it matters. And a great example of this, and one of my favorite examples from competition law, is the Microsoft tying cases of the early 2000s, right? So Microsoft is told that they cannot sell Office with media player already downloaded onto it because people like Winamp are being forced out of the market. By the time this case goes through, internet speeds have improved enough for you to take 10 seconds to download a Winamp. And so there's no real barrier being created by the existence of media player on that, right? So just from was that regulation necessary becomes a question that comes up, and that leads me to why a lot of tech companies are talking about self-regulation. It isn't because they feel that regulation from regulators will be over-invasive, as much as it's because they feel that they are able to spot the problems in the now, as opposed to explaining it to a regulator 3 years from the now, right? So that's a lot of why self-regulation comes in. And I'm going to use that to answer the first question you asked, not with information asymmetry, but with two actual things I'd like to change about markets or make sure don't happen in markets. The first is over-regulation. I think this was touched on a while back when we were talking about red tape and general bureaucracy. You've got to encourage innovation and entrepreneurship in any country, especially in a country like India, where there are a number of small businesses, right? And those businesses are going to grow into slightly larger, medium-sized businesses, get organized. And to do all of that, what you need to ensure is that you don't have stifling regulation. And I think there's a lot of over-regulation in countries like India, and you need to get rid of some of that. The approaches that new regulators like the Competition Commission are following are great, because they sort of recognize that they need to stay out of certain circumstances. And that's as important as knowing when to step in, because the false negative is as problematic as the false positive. And the other thing I think you really need in a market, and therefore you need to ensure there's no absence of, is the access to capital. Because where you've got free-flowing access to capital, and that could be in terms of credit, that could be in terms of equity investment, that could be in various methods, and M&A, to be honest, what that ensures is that your playing field is more level, right? A lot of people believe that a lot of people get ahead because they've got pre-existing access to capital. Once you democratize that, once you make sure that loans are available, money is no longer a barrier to entry. And when that happens, innovation just flows more freely, in my view.
Oh, that's both great answers, Yaman. I think like the point on over-regulation, yeah, it's an extension of what Dinoo was saying. And, I actually want to see regulators not design regulatory systems, but design systems for freedom. To design systems, freedom, I mean, like, I've been thinking a lot about like contracts as enabling freedom as opposed to disabling bad behavior, And I want to create like contracts for liberation. So similarly, I think we need to create markets for liberation as opposed to waiting for things to happen and then looking backwards. PDP is the best example because the personal data protection bill is the best example because nobody knows what's going to happen exactly. We all have some idea about where it might fall, but it's not very clear. It's not very clear the extent to which like small firms are going to have to spend a lot of money to be able to comply. I think it's going to see a lot of flourishing because there's a whole range of innovation that's possible just based on regulatory changes, right? And I think as lawyers, we can be more free thinking in designing products as opposed to providing services. So for instance, like come up with a service where you unite, like, now that I've started saying this, I feel like I'll just finish it. It's not, sorry to be digressing. Like consent managers are something that's necessitated by the new act, but imagine a service where you aggregate consent managers and so startups can spend a small amount of money instead of spending a lot of money to hold them. So more innovation around regulatory changes so that the effect of regulatory changes can be smoother on a larger number of people is supremely important. I think that's the other side of the coin of the point that you made. The second point that you made on access to capital, man, that, like I've already said it, can't agree more. It will be great to have Professor Somashekar close on this, because I think he's going to have the meta point on this matter. So what would you not do if you were setting up a market today?
Yeah, initially I really couldn't figure out what I wouldn't do, but one thing's very important. While I said that we must produce a product which has social value, which really creates value for a customer, one thing which we cannot stop doing in this age is innovating. Whether it's innovating the product, whether it's innovating the process, as you spoke about earlier, Badri, or whichever process it involves, maybe even in terms of marketing, you cannot stop innovating. You may have a good product, but you can still fail pretty badly if your pricing is wrong, if your marketing is wrong. So you still need to be street smart in terms of getting your product out there and making it successful. So you cannot stop thinking on your feet, because competition in the digital era is that much more stiffer, right? They're able to observe you, they're able to copy you, they're able to imitate your tactics. So you really have to be thinking very street smart. So yes, do good, but don't stop thinking strategically. And when I say strategically, I don't mean in the antitrust or competition law perspective of strategic behavior to prevent entry or to force rivals to exit from the market. That's not what I'm talking about. You still need to be strategic.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, how can you not be strategic, right? Like, but so what I think that's a very fair meta point. Do anything to enable innovation, and all else will take care of itself in a certain way, right? It solves the problem of access. It solves problems around capital, maybe dignity. Newer models can work out a little better, so on and so forth. It's a good answer. I think, I mean, like, there's a lot more ground I was hoping to cover, but this itself feels like there's a lot to unpack. I mean, I have to sit for some hours after this and mull over this. But I want to ask you all one question, which we like to ask our panelists, because as you know, this is a series of fundraisers. They're meant to serve a bunch of people who don't have access to capital. This event's been made possible by a bunch of initiatives. There's Gather, which is interested in designing better human interactions and building communities. There's Just Learning, which designs the architecture to make justice inevitable in the world. There can be many models for doing that. You've suggested a lot of them yourself today. We think of ourselves as a media first projects company, We're like working on the ideas that come out and enabling others to participate in that. There's Help a Stranger, which is an initiative we've just started, which enables direct cash transfers to the strangers who make your life possible. So cab drivers, it could be delivery boys, the house help, so on and so forth. We built the model. It's live. It's at donate.covindiasupport.com. We're still evolving our distribution models, but it exists. We want to build a parallel system of taxation based on kindness, as opposed to this feeling that the state is stealing from you. It's also enabled by this event is also put together with the Garden City Legal Hackers. Legal Hackers is a community where we try to create a justice mindset amongst people who work in and with the law, which is really all of us as citizens, to enable more people to design laws, enable laws to be fungible, be more responsive, as opposed to think about how to comply, because law is probably the only discipline where following what has always been true is organizing principle of its truth, right? That sounds a bit silly. So we need more forward-thinking efforts, as we've learned in this conversation. So whoever's tuned in, we would suggest that you donate whatever you would on a Swiggy meal, or I mean, like, not to. We haven't been paid by Swiggy, so we should say Uber Eats. I don't know if Uber Eats exists anymore, but whichever platform you use, donate what you can towards this effort. we're much less interested in large acts of kindness compared to small acts of regular kindness, because that's what is effective. And so looks like my internet connection is okay, sorry for that interruption. That was my internet's doing, not mine. The question I had for all of you was, how do you think about giving and service in and through your work, right? Because a lot of what you do has a publicness associated with it. So I'd love for you to mull over your own publicness in your private evolution, the work that you do with different firms, so on and so forth. This time we'll start with Professor Somashekar because he has the most obvious answer perhaps, but we'd love to hear more about this than your work as a teacher and educating like thousands of us over the years.
Thank you. It's evolutionary, Badri, but one thing that I have come to realize is that in most educational institutions, we are too busy giving you unnecessarily knowledge or trying to give you skill sets. But some important things that educational institutions should be doing is also giving you values. We cannot give you values, but sometimes we have to live by example. And I mean, I hope I've done that to some minimal extent, but I believe it's very, very important the way in which you interact with your students. Just your simple interaction itself can, bring about some core values which we need to carry about when we interact with others. And when I say core values, is one of the most core values. For instance, at times students have reached out and they said, there's so many things to do and I can't do it. I feel stressed out. There's so much of competition. And one simple aspect is that we have to understand that we live in such a comparative world that we are never going to be satisfied. So I think if we pause, if we appreciate what others are doing, if we also congratulate the other person's success, even if you're competing with that person, these sort of few nice behavioral traits, if we acquire, I think will make us feel more at peace, no matter what we seek to do and how much we achieve out of that. So I would say that it's very important that as a teacher, that I inculcate some of these values in myself and the way in which I bring it out when I interact with my students.
So that's, I mean, I love your answer because it defined what Akash and I have spoken about as being micro-ambitious. You can't afford to be anything else when you're innovating, like large-scale change seems impossible, but changing your life a little bit, another person's life a little bit is a nice way of thinking about it. Dinoo, you next. How do you think about giving?
So flowing actually from what Professor Somashekar just said, it's not just, I would think that it's not just kindness to everybody else, but also I would say be kind to yourself. I think we as Indians sometimes have a particularly harsh outlook on what we should be doing, on our achievements, on ambition, all of that. A little kindness which you extend to the world and also to yourself will help you sleep at night, make you a better person, and push you into a better and kinder ecosystem. So it's a short answer, but that's it.
No, it's an answer long enough for us to, for once, be within the time limit. But that would be shocking. It's shocking for a panel which has both Yaman and me to have done anything within a time limit. So, Yaman, you next. How do you think about giving through your work? You've always done it. You've taught so many people how to dialogue. It started with debate, but it became so much more than that over the years. How do you think about giving in your work and through your work?
Yeah, so I think a lot of what Professor Somashekar said sort of resonates also because it's true for him, right? As in, I think, at least as someone who was taught by him many years ago, I think we definitely learned from what you did and not just what you said. And I think that's something that at least I've tried to imbibe as well, which is you can really only give back by how you are. And you've got to sort of just practice what you preach, be what you want others to be to you, right? So the whole do unto others and all of that. So I think, yeah, be kind, do more, do as much as you can, but yeah, give yourself a break sometimes. But yeah, as in mostly be willing to sort of put yourself out there and do what it is that you think will make the difference. So do it yourself if you think that it will matter.
Yeah, hey, that's a nice way of it was all, and I think Yaman, you've been just as successful in doing it, and I think that's actually true of everyone here. So thanks to all of you for being the way that you have been. Akash, man, final words. Thanks so much for joining us. I mean, I called you today out of the blue, out of like so many years, and here you are with us this evening. How do you think about it?
I'll keep it short, right? I think there is this inherent or fundamental belief that people are good and people are smart, and I think our job is just to give them those opportunities, the platform opportunity. In our case, helping those businesses with those tools, which can help them leverage their own smartness at that. So it's just about enabling them in the truest sense.
Okay, fair enough. Like everyone's enabling self-determination, which is nice. Akash, I should also point out that within half an hour of meeting us, you offered us office space in your conference room. And we came and used that for a bunch of time right after. So it's really nice of you, because I think this culture really is something which goes inside your company and also outside your company, And so to sort of close the panel with this exercise, I think when we think about markets or when we think about life, how you do anything is how you do everything. So you'll notice it in the way the office is organized. You'll notice it in the way text is laid out on your website. You'll notice it in the way that you resolve disputes on your platform. So, I mean, it's been wonderful to have you all here. Thank you so much for joining in. And yeah, I look forward to hearing again from you soon. Please, let's hope that this is our first conversation and not the last one on this platform.
I sure had a good time. I'm definitely looking forward to the next one.
Awesome.
Thanks for connecting all of us, Badri, and great initiative, on forming these small networks of discussion and exchange of ideas.
But it's actually a much larger network, right? Like small implies large and atom implies the universe. And it's impossible to talk about one without talking about Anyway, I'm gonna cut the live stream with that thing.